Hey there, I'm Shane. Today I'm going to be talking about the Sony 16 to 55mm f2.8 lens. This is a high-performance zoom lens made for Sony APS-c style cameras like the a6000, a6400, or a6600, or even the FS7 if that's your camera of choice. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the build quality, the image quality, and ultimately just my opinion on the lens and if I think it's a good decision to buy. So this video is going to be a very comprehensive review of the Sony 16 to 55mm f2.8 G lens made for Sony E-mount cameras. But before I dive into the review, I'll just talk about the basics as usual. This is a standard zoom lens made for Sony APS-c cameras, and it covers a very similar focal length, that of a 24-70 lens, which is a very standard professional lens for full-frame cameras, which is very versatile, meaning that you can do anything from landscapes to portraiture quite easily because you get a decent amount of compression when at the 55mm end of this lens. The other benefit of this lens is an f2.8 lens, meaning that it can shoot in relatively low light situations, as well as also getting a very decent amount of subject isolation, making it again very versatile. And overall, this lens is just a very competent jack of all trades, meaning that you can take it with you to pretty much any situation and get a decent photo or video, making it a very useful lens and very long-awaited lens for Sony E-mount cameras. I'll move on now to the build quality though, and this lens is built incredibly well. It does sport Sony's G logo on the side of it, indicating it's part of Sony's more premium lens lineup, but quite frankly, in terms of the build quality, I'd compare it to a GM lens, and it's just incredibly good. It does have a programmable button on the side of it, which is nice because you can set that to whatever you want. I have it set to autofocus, as well as an autofocus and manual focus toggle, which again is nice because it frees up a programmable button on the back of your camera and makes you not have to go into the atrocious Sony menu systems. The lens is a externally zooming lens, which means that when you zoom, it gets bigger like this, which is not really that big of an issue and is very common for lenses in this focal length. However, it is very nicely dampened, and I've never had an instance where it creeps out if I have the lens down like this while I'm walking. The focus wheel is very nicely dampened as well and is easy to use. The front element has a filter ring of 67mm, which is very standard, and I usually just use a step-up ring to go to 77mm because most of my filters are that, and it's nice and well made. In terms of the back of the lens, it is again a metal mount, and this lens is completely weather sealed, as well as having a rubber gasket at the back, which is incredibly rare for Sony E-mount cameras and is very much so appreciated. And I've put this to the test in the rain and it performs incredibly well, and I've had no issues with dust or moisture with it while I've been using it. Overall though, I think this lens is just a marvel of engineering, and Sony did a fantastic job while designing it. I'll move on now to the image quality, and I'm happy to say again this lens performs incredibly well. Across the zoom range at f2.8, it's incredibly sharp, though it is the weakest when at 55mm. However, that's not terribly uncommon, and you just notice it at the edge of the frames where it's a little bit more dull. Realistically though, if you strop this lens down, it's nearly perfect and easily outperforms the 24 megapixel sensors found in Sony's a6000 series cameras currently, and is more than you really need in most situations. The biggest drawback of this lens is probably with its distortion in vignetting when at 16mm, and if you don't correct it in Lightroom, it's almost comical because you can almost see the inside of the lens because the distortion is just that strong. However, it's easily corrected in Lightroom or whatever editing software you're using, and is auto-corrected in JPEGs in the camera, so it's really solid, but it is just notable to know that it is decently bad. The minimum focusing distance of this lens is 33 centimeters, which isn't close enough to do any real macro photography. However, if you do put extension tubes on the back of this lens, you can actually get very decent macro photos because of how sharp this lens is. And because this lens has a constant aperture of f2.8, it can get very nice shallow depth of field images. And with the 9 rounded aperture plates that this lens has, the bokeh is very smooth and pleasant, and I'd compare it to more of what a GM lens looks like, and I've been very happy with the images I've gotten from it. This lens also has superb flare resistance and chromatic aberration control, making editing photos from this lenses very pleasant, and I find the colors and the contrast coming out of this lens extremely good and easy to work with. So far in this review, I've been extremely positive about this lens, and I'll continue to do so because the autofocus performance is absolutely ludicrous. It has Sony's XD linear motors inside it, which are found in most of their more premium lenses, and when paired with a camera like the A6600 or basically any of Sony's newer APS-c cameras, it absolutely flies. It's so good, it's at a point where you basically can't capture it in a video like this. It's only limited by how fast you can move the camera or choose a subject to focus on. Another nice thing though is it's absolutely silent, so when you want to use it in a video mode and you want to track a subject or even just video yourself in a vlog style, you can't hear the motors. Even though they could be working as fast as they can, they're absolutely silent. The manual focus performance is extremely good as well. Even though it is still a focus-by-wire system, I find it's very easy to use, and it is a linear response, and as I said earlier, the ring is nicely dampened, meaning that when you want to easily pull focus, you can. One key feature that this lens is missing though is image stabilization, which is a darn shame because most of Sony APS-c cameras on the market right now don't have sensor stabilization. And even the ones that do, the sensor stabilization isn't the best. Most likely this was to keep the size down on the lens, however, it is a shame that it's not inside the lens, and I really wish it was there. At the end of the day though, as usual, what it comes down to is price. And this lens comes in at $1,300 US or 1450 Canadian, which is rather expensive. And it kind of puts this lens in a weird price point because it's going to cost more than the majority of cameras that it's built for. And normally what I'd say would be that you want to invest more in a lens than you do in a glass. However, it's hard to tell Sony's commitment to their APS-c cameras, and even though they did say they are going to make more cameras at that sensor size in the future, this lens is priced at a point where you will want to use it for years to come, and I can't really say definitively if there's going to be years to come for this lens in terms of cameras. However, that's a bigger conversation that really only time will tell the answer to, so I'm not going to include it in the considerations when comparing this lens to other lenses. There are actually a number of lenses that are in the similar focal length to this on Sony APS-c cameras, and I'll start off with the 16 to 50mm f3.5 to 5.6 power zoom lens, which is just the kit lens for Sony APS-c cameras. And it comes in usually at $300 US or 380 Canadian. However, you can get it for significantly cheaper on the used market because a lot of people sell the lens right when they get their camera. But besides having a similar focal length, the two lenses are actually radically different. The kit lens comes with optical stabilization, which is something this lens lacks. However, in every other aspect, it's worse. In terms of autofocus, it's much worse. In terms of build quality, it is significantly less rugged and has no real weather sealing to it. It does have a power zoom function on the kit lens, however, it's not really needed in the majority of situations, especially considering it's rather slow. So it's not really better in any regards besides being cheaper. So it's very difficult to compare the lenses because they're made for completely different situations. The kit lens is a lot more affordable, a lot more compact, and is going to get you by in a lot of situations for basic photography. However, if you want a more premium, high-performing lens, the 16 to 55 is obviously going to be better. Next up is the 18 to 55mm f3.5 to 5.6 optically stabilized lens. This lens usually comes in at $350 US or 400 Canadian. Again, it's much easier to find cheaper copies on the used market for this lens, and it's actually hard to find it in a store because it's the old kit lens for Sony APS-c cameras, and is actually the first zoom lens that I owned. So it has a near dear spot in my heart. However, it's a rather rubbish lens, and it's pretty much, again, worse than this lens in every respect. It has slower autofocus, it is much poorer in terms of image quality, and has a much poorer build. However, it does have image stabilization still, which the 16-55 does not have. So it's a small positive, however, it's a much worse lens. Both of those lenses though are rather unfair to compare to this lens because this lens isn't designed to compete with them. Both of the kit lenses are designed to be what they are, kit lenses. They're meant to be versatile zoom lenses that you first use when you're starting off with photography, not a high performance one. So it's a reason why this lens was so highly anticipated when it was launched, because there was nothing really to compete with it in its lineup. With that said though, there is a relatively new full frame lens that I'd like to compare this to, which is the Tamron 28-75mm f2.8. It comes in at a very competitive price point of $880 US or 1,000 Canadian, which is already cheaper than this lens. However, it is slightly larger and has a significantly more plastic build design, so it's not nice as nice on the Sony APS-c bodies as this lens will be. However, it is extremely easy to use still and is a very small lens, relatively speaking. In terms of image quality, it is very comparable and is an extremely sharp lens, as well as also being an f2.8 constant lens, meaning that it lets in a lot of light and can isolate subjects just as well. The reason I do say that the Tamron would be a good lens to consider also is because if you do plan to upgrade to full frame down the road, the Tamron will work on a full frame camera. However, the 16-55 is relegated to being in APS-c mode when put on a full frame camera. Even though optically it's very high performing, the Tamron has actually a little bit more lags, and as I said earlier, it's hard to tell the kind of direction Sony APS-c cameras are having, so I think the Tamron might be a good option to consider. With that all said though, I do vastly prefer the 16-55, and I actually ended up buying this lens because I was using the Tamron for a while, but I found its size and just general tactile use to be rather annoying, and I wanted a little bit more of a compact lens, so I went with this one. In conclusion to this review though, I think the Sony 16-55mm G lens is an absolutely phenomenal lens. With regards to the image quality, I've been absolutely blown away, and its general design and build is what I wish all Sony lenses were like. It's extremely rugged while not making any sacrifices. The biggest shame of this lens is that it might have come a little bit too late to the party, kind of after the golden era of the Sony a6000. And even though the cameras are extremely popular, this lens might be priced to be inaccessible to most of the people it's designed for. With that said though, if you're considering this lens and have the resources to buy it, this is my favorite lens I've used in a long time, and it's probably the only lens I'm gonna ever want to use on my Sony a6600, just because of how well it performs, and I just find it's very easy to use. Well, that's it for the video. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and if you enjoyed the video, maybe consider liking the video and subscribing. It really goes a long way and helps me grow my channel. And if you have any questions about the lens, or you just have anything to say, please feel free to leave a comment below. I try to answer every comment, and I just enjoy having a healthy conversation or answering any questions that you might have. Anyways, thanks again for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day. See you in the next one.